Welcome to the Femme Futurists Society. So today's guest is the founder of creative consultancy Sunni Brown Inc. and the Center for Deep Self-Design. She was named one of the 100 most creative people in business and one of the 10 most creative people on Twitter by Fast Company. Her TED Talk has drawn over 1.6 million views, and her work on visual thinking has been featured in every major US publication, including the New York Times, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Wired, Entrepreneur, as well as being featured twice on CBS Sunday Morning and on the Today Show. She was recruited by former CEO of Mural to be their first and only innovator in residence. Her two globally beloved books, Gamestorming, which is a playbook for innovators, rule breakers, and change makers, and The Doodle Revolution, which I have a copy of,
yes,
The Power to Think Differently, have been translated into 25 languages and counting. As a collaboration designer and facilitator, she and her team have designed and led hundreds of group experiences in diverse industries and is widely credited with the rise of visual thinking as a tool for deeper inquiry. Welcome, Sunni Brown, to Femme Futurists Society. We are
so glad to be with you. Yes, thank you. I'm delighted. I was thrilled to see you in my inbox.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I want to ask you, is it Sunny or Sun?
So now it's Sun, and it was Sunny my whole life, and I have a Dharma name, which is Sun Kagami, and so I do prefer Sun now. I just feel a little more mature and wiser, and Sunny is a little chipper for me at this point. So, but if you slip up and call me Sunny, that's fine, because we know each other, so it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So. One of the things that I find endlessly fascinating about you is that you have been a devout student of American Zen Buddhism since 2007. And you, your life motto is, and correct me if I pronounce this wrong, shoshaku, jushaku. Which is one continuous mistake.
Yes.
You describe it as a philosophy of joy that trusts in productive discomfort and embraces our messy humanity.
I know.
How we're doing that for people listening, we just did jazz hands to that.
Jazz hands. Clapping for our mistakes. Yes.
I mean, that's so amazing and so deep. Really,
it is
a very profound statement. So can you explain more about that to us and how that influences both your life and your work?
I love that question. And I almost got a tattoo of shoshaku, jushaku because it's so important to me, but I'm not a tattoo person per se, so I didn't. But if I were going to get one, it would be that. And it's so funny.
Tattoo.
Yeah. And it's beautiful in kanji, and Japanese kanji, but it's funny because I want to say how counterintuitive it is, that motto, because my husband the other day realized that I have this motto. Somehow it came up in conversation he didn't know prior. And I said it and he thought I was joking. Like his head whipped to me like he thought it was a joke. And I just waited, because it's counterintuitive particularly to Westerners. But it's not counterintuitive to improvisational people, definitely not to Zen students, and to people who have really been in the mud of life and are kind of in the arena, as maybe Brene Brown might say. But and so it is crucial to me as a human being because I don't need to be a flawlessly executed, perfected craft of greatness. I actually want to be messy and authentic and earnest because that's empowering, not only because that's earnest, because things are such a mess. Like if you're actually trying to do things, you're going to stumble. And that is what growth is, but also because it makes me feel stronger. And so it's not necessarily like what's the word, like a really humble endeavor. It is an empowering state to occupy. And and I know you and Nancy and Mida, I'm sure that y'all have conversations about this all the time. The future is very uncertain. And so for us to attempt to occupy certainty is at this stage in history feels very foolish. And so there's multiple reasons why making mistakes and finding the levity and agility in it is such a powerful approach to life, even though it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, I feel as though this goes beyond the mantra of it's okay to fail.
Yeah, it's not fail faster, fail more. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas
No.
the thing that I really enjoy about it is that it strikes at the heart of our messiness. I read something the other day about, our approach to fear and how we fear,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
We see some of these traits as negatives.
Yeah. And we try to
Actually,
conquer them.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But that is where we find our capacity to be greater,
Yeah, absolutely.
And, doing the shadow work, like
That's
that's
right.
something that's happening a lot right now, is that people are starting to do the shadow work, to look at the darker side of ourselves.
Yeah.
Completely view. I mean, we it's really, really hard to embrace change and face change and complexity and ambiguity and all of the things that we exist in and right here right now in this moment in time, unless we're willing to approach it as a whole human.
Absolutely. And I like that you're noticing that, because it gives me hope for the future, not sort of a whimsical, fantastical hope, but a really grounded hope that there's emotional honesty coming for us in our, growth curve as a species, And I think that there was this guy that was talking about Brain 3.0 the other day. I sent out a Substack. I've been writing on Substack and really enjoying it. And he sent out this note about Brain 3.0, and I don't know what he meant by it, but it was my interpretation of it was that it's the integration of these aspects of ourselves that are really complex and we don't want to see. And you can, and it doesn't serve to be in denial of the things that are undone and unmet in our lives. It actually is incredibly, again, it's empowering. It's not like a special thing to do. It's more of a healthy and appropriate thing to do. And I understand the turning away and the desire to, that's how white supremacy, just to get there, that's how it perpetuates itself. It just right. It's complete denial, right? Of it's like somehow there's a confusion around taking responsibility and like having blame assigned to us. It's like, no, it's just this is the reality of what it took to build this country. This is what happened to human bodies when we established our material wealth and our, pursuit of, quote, happiness. And then we put it under the rug and act like that's not a part of who we are. And that doesn't serve the people that have been wounded, including ourselves. And it doesn't serve how does that serve character? What kind of person do you become when you don't include and integrate all of the just absolute, even repulsiveness of our of our natures is that's where one continuous mistake, that's another application of it, is that yes, it applies to creativity and it applies to problem solving and it applies to entrepreneurial spirit and it applies to character development and spiritual practice. So it's useful in all those areas. I don't want to be a person who doesn't bring in my whole self, ugly parts and all.
Yeah. And the idea of perfectionism is kind of ridiculous anyway. I mean,
it's silly.
I think we're on a constant quest to better ourselves, or I hope we are. I personally hope we are.
Right.
I think that's what we're all striving to create, is something better, whether that's internally or externally. But I think it's very, very difficult for leaders in particular. And you work in the business world. I mean, we started off with a very from a very spiritual springboard, but actually the work that you do is very influential in business environments. And do you see that a lot, that, it's really difficult for leaders to acknowledge, they make mistakes and be vulnerable, and,
it's definitely a generational, there's an interesting generational curve there. And there's also a gender sort of probabilistic model there. And so it is fascinating to see the belief structures that people come in with, like what leadership looks like, what it is, what it upholds. And so I have a lot of empathy for the struggle to move toward what I would think of as modern leadership, because modern leadership is and again, it's context specific, but most of the time it requires a vulnerability that people have actively been trained against, and so I see the attempts to present sort of a unified and flawless expertise at the expense of the relationship with the team, or the expense of a relationship with yourself. And also, and this is why the collaboration work I deeply love so much, because it's an invitation to actually creating an emergent field that makes innovations more possible. But yeah, I see it's absolutely really difficult for leaders to not know everything, and to acknowledge their own frailty.
There's a really interesting conversation between Chip Conley and Brian Chesky. They worked together for a little while, and Chip Conley described their relationship as not mentor and mentee, but they learned from each other.
They were each other's teachers.
Exactly, and
awesome.
It doesn't matter how tenured you are, or like what position you're in. It's all about a willingness, I think, to learn right across the board, whether that's from your teams, from your family, from your friends, from yourself. Self part that I'm really fascinated by right now.
Learning from yourself.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that we've been observing is that we've had the Sustainable Development Goals, right, which are the 17 goals that we've had to solve the world's biggest global challenges. And recently there has been a flip, as what they've been discovering is there's no shortage of vision, right?
Right.
Through this moment in time where we've learned a lot about ourselves and our capabilities, and basically we've learned that we can do anything. Like at this, like we thought that sort of before, but this moment we've realized that actually there is a lot that we could do that we didn't either believe we were capable of, or didn't have the capacities. But now we're in a moment where we have exponential technologies available to us.
Wow.
And we can do it, literally anything is possible. What's happening is that our inner development, our human capacities to deal with our increasingly complex environment has not kept pace with what we're capable of doing, and that represents a problem on many, many fronts, right?
Oh my God, on almost every front.
Almost every front. So I'm curious what your take on all of that is.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because when I started doing what I refer to as inner science and inner engineering, I had to do that. Like I was forced into a corner based on life circumstances and conditions. So it was like, there's this neuroscientist named Oliver Sacks, and he talks about how something when it breaks down. And so I started to understand the construct of the mind when mine broke down. And so then I was looking at it from like a distance, and then I was learning how to work with it and meet it differently, and understand what emotions are and how they motivate you. And so it was a real gift in my life, even though it was really fucking difficult, but it was a real gift. But it was crazy because I was doing a parallel sort of self-study and self-inquiry and self-recovery that in a way slowed down my work, because I devoted so much time to it, and it wasn't obvious how it would be fruitful, And now it's been 16 years since that initial sort of emergency. And now I see how fortuitous it was that I was forced to confront those things, because I can meet things differently. And it's so interesting, because when you were talking about, what's beautiful about us having all this superpowered technology, but this internal underdeveloped space, is that now there's a collision. It sounds like you're seeing that the friction between those two things is making itself apparent. And then that is when change happens at that edge. So it's a good thing, which is actually partly why I opened the Center for Deep Self-Design, to meet that need.
Oh my God. So that's a perfect segue.
Yeah.
Yes. Because that was on my list of things. I mean, your expertise is really creatively solving external challenges, right? And as we're talking about, that's what we've all been focused on.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I feel like we're through that moment now.
Wow.
You know, we're turning our attention towards resolving internal challenges, which you believe is a source of a lot of unnecessary struggle, right?
Yeah.
And so please, I would love that. And for anyone listening to, when I went to visit Sunny's, Sun, called the Center for Deep Self-Design, I loved this line that was there front and center, which it says, "A good life is an inside job. So come to the center and wash your mind."
You find my favorite things.
Oh my God.
That's my favorite.
It's so great. It is so great. I just, and that's kind of says it all.
Yeah. In a nutshell. Yeah.
Please tell us more about the Center for Deep Self-Design and what deep self-design actually even is.
Yeah. Well,
to work and yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for asking. So, and I started it in Austin, right? So the Center for Deep Self-Design, to your kind of it was this innovation. So I'm a creative, and so I'm always making new things, whether they're great or just awful, it doesn't matter. It's just a generative process. And after 15 years or 14 years at that point of doing this inner work, it was it made sense for me to, I used the Gamestorming and I used design thinking and visual thinking to facilitate and aid my intimacy of my own internal world. They were tools that I used for that. So of course I was going to weave those together and make an offering for people because the inner work is invisible. It's harder to work with because you can't see it. You can't hold it. And so you have to externalize it. And so those tools were incredibly helpful for doing that. So I had been working on this method called Deep Self-Design for years and years. There's a book associated with it, etc. And then I was opening a center in Austin, and then the pandemic just crushed it. It was March 2020 was our first. I know. It was crazy. The timing was absolutely uncanny. I was like, wow, I'm not really one who says oh, this is a sign, I know that I have interpretive storytelling, sometimes I'll take it, but sometimes I don't, and I don't believe it all the time. So, but I was like, wow, March 16th was it was crazy. So I shelved it. I had all of the things required to start that venture, and I just totally shelved it because who knew
I was doing this whole time. For some reason, this is kind of a new thing that you're really diving into
it's a reopening. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And the thing is, I was working on it in the background, and so it's not it's not like I didn't keep working on the method, didn't keep acquiring facilitators and techniques. And so it was always operative in the background, but it was more like people were in survival mode, no one was knowing how to conduct our lives or where to live, or, you know what I mean? So, and I remember for a minute, I thought, well, maybe I'll be a book coach. And then I got recruited at Mural. So that was a very intense ride for most of the pandemic, a big chunk of it. And so after that,
perfect fit for you too. Sorry for interjecting.
I couldn't believe it.
I thought it was so oh my God, Sun and Mural.
Right. I could not believe it. It was just the most crazy occurrence. And so after that concluded, then I was trying to figure out my next move. And then I had multiple strategic workshops. And then I was like, why the Center for Deep that is my passion. That is my great love. That is the most valuable thing I can offer. And I think it's more needed now, to your point. I think at the time I wasn't ready emotionally or spiritually. I was not ready. And the location was not right. And people weren't ready. Customers would not have, they're more ready now. I think they were some, early adopters would have been ready then, but I think there's much more ripeness now, Yeah. So it just makes sense to reopen.
Right. So you don't believe in divine intervention?
Let me put it this way. I believe in a probabilistic universe, and I believe that there are activities and mysteries that we cannot know, or we cannot pretend to. We are in relationship with the divine all the time. For me, there's no question about that personally. Now, whether we always interpret it, accurately, or whether we are miss it, because sometimes it happens and you miss it. You don't even know something moved, and so I would say I do believe in divine intervention in the sense that everything is an emergence of divinity on some level, and that yes, it is absolutely, we are in a co-creative relationship with that all the time, and so it's intervening regularly, and I think that this is going to be borne out by science, and it probably already has been. You're influencing it, and so your imagination, for example, is a power. That's an actual power and a force. And so you can move the field of possibility by infusing it with imaginative effort. So, it's a long way of saying I do believe in divine intervention,
Yeah,
but
I think intuition too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading recently about a scientific study that was conducted, and it conclusively conclusively proved that our intuition is an actual thing that the brain does that has scientific merit. It's not that feeling is connected to something that is triggered in our brains, that is a result of our sensory stimuli. So I think we've barely begin to scratch the surface of what we are capable of as humans. If we start, we're so focused on what we're building out there. I wish that we could somehow get inside the architecture of our minds. And I don't mean, of course, neurologists and psychologists and people who study the brain do all of that, but I mean, for the average person, it would be so fascinating. If we could just, plug ourselves into a machine every day. Nancy actually loves to talk about it from the point of view of dreams. If we had a dream interpreter where we were like, oh my God, what was that?
I know, we'd have such more clarity around like what to do and how to approach it. I know, and I think that's why rituals are important. And I think that creating space for an invitation for that to open. So this is a weird leap, but I also took a shamanic training during the pandemic. I just was like, well, what's going on in that world, And it was so fascinating because it was a training around the liminal spaces and being more perceptive in things like impressions and shadows and light and sound and like energy, subtle energy. And so it wasn't magical. It was actually very practical. And I left that training with a deeper respect for the importance of a ritual, whatever that may be, that sort of is an invitation to the sacred and a conversation with that sacred piece. And I think our intuition, are you intuitive? Do you feel strong?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's such a powerful gift. I mean,
I feel like most people are, but maybe they're not.
They kind of occlude it. Some people haven't developed my husband's not intuitive at all. No. Like he has developed, he has a hyper developed analytical capacity and actually a numbification of his internal sense. So he doesn't have that super highway, he's building it, but it was taken from him really in conditioning. And so intuition is not his strength at all. He respects it now, having lived with a really intuitive person, but it's not something it's not a muscle he has developed,
I think another piece of that too is the observation of ritual and tapping into the subconscious, which is a whole other level, right, of our being, but also this paying attention to the spaces in between. We're so about the beginning and the end, the very clear pathway and the very clear journey, and between sensing and responding, between you know, that I think sometimes, and Nora Bateson, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but she talks about this a lot. She's all about warm data. And those spaces in between that create is where we find the really rich purview for what's actually happening. And
That's amazing.
yeah, so there's something about that too that I think we maybe don't spend enough time, and that really for me comes back to how you describe this messiness, because it's not clear in there. It's not a clear picture in there. It's
That's right.
really messy, right?
Yeah.
What's going on in between those data points? But
And that's why
for context and sense making.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's probably, there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to expand the pause there. And I think that I spent a lot of time thinking about, to your point, like how to usher in that interest in a world that is messy, invisible, symbolic. It's not necessarily it has a lot of fraught emotional context. It's like getting people willing to walk through that threshold. I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes somebody do. I call it the inward turn, and that's from my teacher.
The what turn?
The inward turn.
Inward turn. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we're just like so externally focused, and so it's just taking a moment and turning your awareness and your attention inside. Because that's where a lot of action is. That's where like the vast majority of activity is happening. I mean, this is on the website, about 90% of your internal processing comes from your own thinking of your cerebral cortex. So it's like we are generating our own worlds all the time with our perceptual equipment and our sensory equipment and our emotional information and our backstories. And so it's useful to get in there, but it's daunting. It's very daunting. And unless you're really forced into it, or you suffer some serious consequences from that, it's hard to want to make that effort.
So, I mean, it's really, really clear how important this work is, doing the self-work to everything, really, everything.
Yes, literally everything.
Literally everything. let's just put it let's just leave it at that.
Put a stake in the ground. Yeah, it's all the things. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you and how can we be less encumbered by going through that process? How can we do the work, find the time, carve out space, have the feel the psychological safety in going there and doing that, because it's really clear. How do you do that in your work? Because it's clear that we need it, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of what you're doing with the Center for Deep
Self-Design. Yeah, and the method. And so we're going to train people in 101 and 201. And 101 is really just, it's like you have to make it really as simple and elegant as conceivably possible. And so when I came up with the method, I had this like very elaborate architecture that was a function of several years of research. And then finally, I just woke up and I was like, what am I doing with myself when I am having a emotional like sense of something wrong, of some kind of unrest? And the first thing that I do is I notice it, just that. I just pay attention. I'm like, oh, I don't feel good all of a sudden. So I was in a state that was maybe calm or just fine. And then I'm suddenly not in that state anymore. So I got an email, something was distressing. I'm not in that state. So I'm paying attention, And then when I'm paying attention, I turn my awareness to that phenomenon, just looking at the phenomenon with curiosity. And where a lot of people, I'm not saying these steps are easy, actually. It's not, we're trained to ignore and delete our feelings and our sensations. So even the step of noticing is not a small step. So that you have to care, you have to know why you would bother, right? So, but there's steps to it. And when I turn and I notice, then I have this curiosity expand, right? And so again, that's not easy either, because typically what happens is if there's a space where we are looking at our own experience, we get really critical or really fearful or hard. So a lot of things come up. And so The other sort of key for me is a friendly regard. So I treat myself like I'm a friend of mine, and because that's the ticket to the psychological safety piece. It's like, oh, I care about myself, meaning that I have, and it doesn't mean I'm putting myself on a pedestal. It doesn't mean I'm worshiping myself. It doesn't mean I'm obsessing with myself. It means have benevolent regard for my experience.
That is so, I really love that. And the reason why is as you were talking and as you were describing that, I'm thinking, well, God, how do you do that? Do you have to practice detachment? Like there's a certain amount of detachment that you have to, right, that distance, so that you're kind of looking outside looking in, so that you can go there. You're not impacted by what you're observing.
Such a great question.
I love what you said, which kind of answered my question. I feel like it did, which is being a friend to yourself. Detachment almost is being a friend to yourself, which is not actually detachment at all. It's just from a different point of view.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's a great question. And I think of it too. And this is all training from my Zen training. So this is not me inventing these things, but it's called coming alongside. So it's like, oh, there's a sensation, a discomfort. And so I'm going to, sometimes all you can do is be that. You can't observe it. You can just only be it, because it might be just kind of, you're in the grip. So if I'm in the grip, meaning that it's just, I'm like having a ball of stress in my stomach and I'm just in the grip of it and I can't observe it, then I just breathe into that. And eventually you do actually get some observing capacity. Most people, again, these are all different and applied, brains, but I usually can separate once I have some slowing down and breathing. And from that place, it's a friendly inquiry. How are you? Like, I noticed that you're in pain. How are you?
Empathy there is so beautiful. I think it's something that we need to practice more of. We need to see more of. And I think that our leaders need to exemplify.
Absolutely. I mean, the New Zealand Prime Minister, I don't read the news. Like, I mean, I'm a total
fangirl.
Like, she is remarkable, and I mean, I think she's
lead from kindness, lead with kindness. Her entire that was her entire philosophy as the Prime Minister, is there's no excuse for not practicing kindness, and that informs every single decision that she made and every step that she took for the country, and also for her cabinet ministers as well.
Oh my God.
She introduced the well-being budget.
Wow. It reminds me. Yeah. Oh, I love her so much. It reminds me of this quote from Father Greg Boyle. He's a Jesuit priest, and he said, kindness, and now we should unpack it a little bit because it's not readily obvious, but it was, kindness is the only non-delusional response to anything. Kindness is the only non-delusional response to anything. So this is where I think people get lost in that, because if we unpack it, what he means is delusion, right? So our own distorted views of what's happening, and our own really inability to see reality as it is, not with our layers on it, but just as it is common. So non-delusional means you're sort of deeply present to just what is unfolding, and you're not layering it with like, this shouldn't be the case, or somehow that's their fault. You're just present. And then kindness is a non-delusional response. It doesn't mean, there's an expression that sounds kind of harsh in Zen, and it's idiot compassion. So it doesn't mean foolishness. It doesn't mean bleeding heart, totally absent of wisdom approach to something. It means compassion and wisdom together. So there are plenty of policies that you can see where the intent was compassionate, like in Portland here, the intent to decriminalize drugs was a compassionate intent. And the outcome, because it wasn't necessarily coupled with wisdom, the outcome has been difficult for people, because we just moved here and we're noticing it. So kindness in that statement means sometimes you have to make hard decisions that look mean, but it's actually an act of kindness when you look at the outcome. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tricky discernment. It's a tricky discernment.
Yeah.
We have like saccharine ways to think of kindness, like somebody smokes and you're like, oh, I'm going to bring them a pack of cigarettes. I'm like, that's not actually kind, I mean, depends on the circumstance, but most likely it's not kind. It's just enabling, And so there's
Yeah.
always, they call them near enemies. So it's like all the near enemies that look like something that's useful. Like compassion could look, because pity is not the same as compassion, right? So it's a discernment process. But she is embodying wisdom and kindness at the same time. That's what it looks like.
Right, exactly. That's a beautiful way of describing it, and it's true. And so I want to talk about you talk about collaboration literacy, and you are currently designing a system of collaboration literacy, which just sounds to me, in my very limited understanding of it, like a really incredible, useful tool to have.
Yes.
So,
and that,
yeah.
Yes.
What is that? Collaboration? I mean, it's kind of speaks for itself, but not, because I know you being the deep person that you are, there's a lot to unpack in that.
And it was a function of my experience at Mural. So we were, as a visual collaboration tool. And so we were working on what are these approaches to collaboration. And because I had, I don't know, 14, 15 years of Gamestorming under my belt, I was very clear about what my take on that was. And we didn't get to stand up the category design that we were working on because it was a startup and it was a lot of chaos. But so when I left, I knew that I was going to create my method and unfold it inside of the Center for Deep Self-Design or with Sunni Brown Inc. or something. And so for me, like because I observe, I mean, I have facilitated thousands and thousands and thousands of people and groups and so forth. And so it goes right back to what we were talking about, is like you do get a level of efficacy when you add techniques like gamestorming or design thinking or visual thinking or applied improvisation. You do get a level of efficacy and more skill and collaboration, and that's good. What you don't get is contact with the inner work. And so say you're looking to innovate a product or service, and you have integrated these methods of visualization or, large scale mapping or whatnot, and you will get probabilistically a better outcome. And that's awesome. But and that's what most people think of when they think about amplifying collaboration. And so for me, that is not enough. For me, it's like, no, there's inner collaborative work and there's outer collaborative work. And the integration of those practices results in a condition, like a container with a team or a group, that actually makes them feel connected to each other and less egotistical about the process and just deeply curious. And when it's in its humming state, like when it's like you're in flow, what can emerge from that is just spectacular. And that is made possible by inner and outer collaboration, So for me, that's one of the things I'm going to offer at the center too.
I would have said that those two are almost impossible to do simultaneously. So it blows my mind. I'm like, sign me up. I did want to ask you just really quickly about gamestorming, because it's such a, like, I don't know anything about that. That's not in my world or sphere of understanding. So gamestorming.
So it's a book, but it's a method. And my co-author, Dave Gray, I credit him with sort of being the grandfather or the father of this methodology, in terms of it is a approach to group work that is like multi-sensory and experiential, and you can really bring in almost anything to work with to open up the potential of a group. But it has like a structure. So it's open, explore, close. And then there's games, a sequence of games inside of that process that is designed by a facilitator or collaboration designer that ultimately gets people to something that might have initially been fuzzy, but it gets like divergent and then convergent. So it's a really beautiful method that has endless possibilities. And that was what my team and I spent for a long time applying in group settings. But it doesn't tackle the inner piece. And for me, that's significant to have that integrated. And
Yeah.
not all people want that piece. So more power to them. If they don't want that piece, they can have this other piece, very valuable, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I think of you as kind of the queen of games in a way. Your book, The Doodle Revolution.
Dr. Doodle.
You're
Yeah.
so playful the way that you approach things. And,
Uh-huh.
you know, and I know that we're having a very deep conversation about, you know, the inner self and self-work and self-design. And but, you know, I really love that you also have this kind of irreverence to you.
It's so confusing for people because
I totally get that. I mean, it's contradictory in a way.
it's so funny, Emma, because my teachers, so I've had the great fortune of intersecting with really, really, oh my God, just virtuosic spiritual teachers, and including Dick Schwartz, who founded Internal Family Systems. And so I've had these amazing teachers, Zen priests and clinical psychologists and professors, and they have a gravitas that I wish that I had. I mean, I literally told my teacher a couple of days ago, I said, I wish I were more somber.
No one ever except you, because that is a great thing.
I was like, no one can, because I am so playful. I love play. I love fun. I love joy. And these techniques, they do foster that kind of like Lego serious play thinking, you know? And they are aided by playfulness, because people are so freaked out, you know, when you ask people to do stuff that scares them or it's hard or they have to do it in front of other people. It's nice when I have a non-intimidating way of inviting them in. So there's benefits to it, but there's times when I'm like, God, I wish people knew I'm a philosopher, you know, I'm a student of spiritual practice, you know. It's like, I mean, what would I have to do, you know, to not look like Gidget or whatever.
Well, if it's any consolation, I see you as being this really extraordinary blend of both, and I think that's part of
thank you.
quite a special human, because you are able to traverse both worlds and marry them so wonderfully together in a way that's really meaningful.
Thank you for seeing all of me.
Yes. Yeah.
You and your intuitive sense, your deep intuition,
but also, I mean, your work is out there for for anyone who, I just think for anyone who bothers to know anyone, you know, there's a lot to unearth. And that's, you know, it's part of what's difficult about these conversations, is that there is so much when I start diving in with people like you. I just know right away, God, how are we going to keep this constrained to an hour? Impossible. And
there's so many portals,
by the way. What is really inspiring you right now? I mean, we've heard about the Center for Deep Self-Design, and you know, your work is unbelievably inspiring. So totally understand that work is a constant source of inspiration. And but when you look outside of you, when you look at the world around you, what's the stuff that really lights you up? Like, what do you go, oh my, thank God that's happening in the world, or there's that thing over there that just makes my heart burst, like, and you know, that's
that like lights you up. Well, you know, you actually started our conversation with something that totally reinvigorated me, which was because I know that you and Nancy, I know, are scanning the world in ways that I'm not, and that like y'all are so deep diving into all these different waters. And you said, and it made my heart just like expanded. You said that people are now having those deep conversations around catching up the inner world with the external. And to hear it from you is different from hearing it from just a person on the street or whatever. It's like you're actually looking closely. So that gave me such a moment of chills, actually.
Yeah,
you know?
actually, I just got goosebumps right then when you said
You
that.
did.
Because I mean, I feel as though this is your moment. I really do. I feel like your timing couldn't be more perfect. And I cannot wait for the world. I mean, you're already really well known. I mean, you're a rock star in your world. And
Weird.
so I know that always seems really weird to hear yourself described in that way, but it is true. You know, you already have a body of work that's really extraordinary. And I think that this is a culmination of all of that at a moment in time when it's so desperately needed. I mean,
Oh my God.
we have to do the inner work to be able to handle the outer. Who was that quote? You have to be able to do the inner work to be able to handle the chaos on the edge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's and quote. That was someone else's quote, by the way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, there's a woman writes on Substack. I don't know how to pronounce her name, Suleika something. But she talks about walking on fault lines because she lives with illness, kind of the specter of illness that might reoccur. And so she refers to it as walking on fault lines. And so I really appreciate you noticing just that intersection of these things, because it gives me hope again, and like to step in, because it's not without, you know, my own trepidations and concerns. Like, am I going to do it wrong? I'm not going to be valuable. Is this my function? You know, because it's like, as you stumble forward into the dark, really. And so as a creative, I know that that's part of the process, but I'm still human. So I still wake up and like, oh my God, is this going to be okay for people? You know, and then I befriend myself. Right. And so, but that made me feel so good that you're seeing that need. And the other thing, just to like give a shout out to this community, is it's called We Will Dance with Mountains. And this guy, it is like,
I saw your doodles from that, which are always really just so creative and so cool.
That community.
And I was reading a little bit about it, and
oh, cool
as well.
Yeah. What I love about what they're doing is I think that bravery is what's needed. Sensitivity and fragility is not necessarily useful, like meaning that we have to have tough conversations. We have to have reckonings that we have avoided. We have to trust our strength, you know, and we have to be willing to go together and fail and pick each other up. And to me, that community, I mean, right? Like that is what is being asked of us. And that's what that community is up to. The gentleman who leads it is Bayo Akamolafe, and he is Yoruba. And my God, that guy, I was like, oh my God, he's an African Zen teacher. And he doesn't probably even identify with Zen at all. But he was like a provocateur and just a wonderful facilitator. There was like 1,000 people in that. It was called Vunja, and they just opened it. Like 1,000. It made me feel like, oh my God, there's hope.
You know? That I do think that whole thing about we are in this together. We're doing this together. And part of our reason for starting the Femme Futurist Society was that we really want to balance the dominant masculine conversation with the currently still underrepresented female. And so I think that this is not about male versus female. This is about recognizing that there is partnership here, and we are our best selves when we do this, when we're in this together.
I know. I mean, the fact that we forgot that is in itself is shocking.
Right.
But it is a function of circumstances and belief systems and like conquering mentalities. And so we're having to deprogram from a lot of that stuff and remember what we have known for a long time, you know?